I'm Lucy.
And I'm Jennifer.
You're listening to Everything I Know About.
Each week, we share everything we know about a new topic, equipped with some internet research and a little too much exposure to pop culture.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
We're going to release this episode on Valentine's Day. And so the topic, I think, on a lot of people's minds and our own is love. And this episode, we're going to be covering the history of love, matchmaking, marriage. Then we're going to go into modern notions of love, polyamory, non-monogamous love. We'll talk about kind of the pop psychology fun things, such as the New York Times 36 Questions, How to Fall in Love. And then finally, what research has to say about what makes love actually last.
I was so excited to research into what makes love last. I've read a lot of Esther Perel's books. I love her podcast, Where Do We Begin? And it's basically her in couples therapy sessions, and she records them. So it gets very raw and real. There's so many little things that go into making a relationship last for a long time. And it's what I really am excited to dive into is if those things are predetermined based on your match and your personalities. And I guess that's the more modern pop psychology research. And then with the more couples therapy, Gottman Institute approach, which is can you sort of manufacture happiness in a relationship? And are there just tangible things that every couple needs to do to be happy?
Well, I guess to start, love and marriage are two different things, right? Love is just a feeling, whereas marriage, monogamy, these are rules that you follow. I looked at love from a scientific basis, what's actually happening in your brain, and it's actually super well understood.
Oh, okay.
They break down love into these three components: lust, attraction, and attachment. When you're feeling lust, your ovaries and testes are releasing testosterone and estrogen, and that is that evolutionary need to reproduce. And it actually can shut down your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for rational thinking.
Oh my God.
So
that explains so much.
Yeah. If your partner ever cheats, they're I really wasn't thinking.
I literally could not control myself.
Kind of true. Yeah.
Lizard brain activated. Oh my God.
Attraction, again, influenced by your hormones. So it's dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. I mean, we've heard of these as the happy chemicals, but these are what's responsible for the honeymoon phase. So that is literally why the first few months of being in a relationship, everything is amazing. You want to see that person 100% of the time. I have definitely felt this. When Avery and I first started dating, I was this is the most important thing. I'm not doing anything else. Yeah. And that as well can shut down your prefrontal cortex. So you are behaving irrationally as well, which when I look at these two phases, I'm okay, when I fell in love, I very much trusted my emotions. And I compared it against past relationships and was do I feel more or less strongly about this person than I have in the past? And at the time, I thought I was being rational because I did have a list of things that I knew would be a good match for me, right? I knew I needed someone who's more patient than me. I knew I couldn't be with someone with such a hot temper. And so I felt in the moment I was choosing based on so many of these criteria, but also turns out I was probably just very blinded by whatever chemistry was actually happening. Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting. And then the last one, attraction, the chemicals that are released are oxytocin, which is the cuddle hormone, and then vasopressin. And actually those hormones are released also when we're with our family or when we're with our friends. So attachment in a romantic love sense is actually not different biologically than attachment to anyone in your life that you have a close relationship with.
That's fascinating. So lust and attraction. I know you said that mostly happens during the honeymoon phase, but theoretically they would, in a happy, attracted, loving marriage, would continue in conjunction with that attachment hormone, which shifts the nature of it, of course. Yeah. But I wonder if the lust and attraction fade away and then you're left only with this attachment.
I don't know if there's a super clear answer, but I can say from my own experience being married now for 3 years that I do think many, many couples report that it does become more of this comfort phase. And that's not to say you never feel lust or you never feel attraction toward your partner, but I do think you have to be more intentional because a lot of the things that trigger those initial emotions happen when it's a new, exciting thing. In the honeymoon phase, you're watching them eat a burrito and you're so charming, them eating a burrito. And then eventually when you're married, trust me, okay, now I'm Avery, finish your dinner and clean up the dishes when we're running late. I'm not marveling at him anymore.
Married life sounds incredible. I'm just kidding. I had this therapist. He put this so amazingly. So he was very concerned when I told him that I got engaged after 3 months. He was okay, good for you. And he described to me this exact thing, but from a psychological perspective, you have the really high hormones, but they can actually take up to 2 years to dissipate. So the psychological advice is to wait 2 years before you make any serious long-term commitments. And he calls this dating versus mating. So when you're dating, you always have your escape route. Like you're evaluating somebody objectively and saying, is this person good for me or not? But then when you're mating, once you've made that commitment, you're no longer making those observations from an objective standpoint. You're saying how can I deal with this person and this behavior and this dynamic? And you're more like stuck, so to speak. And so he's like, you don't want to get into the mating phase before you've done the dating phase. And yeah, so he was like quite concerned that I didn't do that. It's been working out fine. Thank you, Jerry. But
I mean, it's been 2 years now, right?
It's been
for
over
you
2
guys?
years. Yeah.
Yeah. So
It's fine. No, I would not recommend anybody else.
Yeah.
It worked out for me, but like definitely, I think it's reckless. Happy I did it though. Wouldn't change it for the world, but definitely reckless.
I mean, but we have control over how long our relationships last and how successful they are outside of just our hormones and biology. Jennifer, I know you did research on like how we can actually make our marriages last longer. What did you find?
Okay, so the Gottman Institute is something that I am so obsessed with. It's a couple, and they're psychological researchers that have been studying marriage and observing married couples since the 70s. They've honed observing couples to such a science that they can predict with a 90% accuracy after observing a couple argue for 20 minutes whether or not that couple will eventually get divorced, which is just insane.
Oh, dang.
Yeah.
That's like a fun betting game.
Right? But like 90% accuracy is just unbelievable to me. So obviously they have so much insight into like what makes a marriage work, what doesn't, and like what are the things that we can do to alleviate the things that actually make us eventually opt for divorce. What I found really interesting about this is most couples fight about nothing. So like this old idea that we're all fighting about like sex or money or jealousy isn't actually true. Like the majority of couples are fighting about something that they can't even identify a day or two later. And what they're really fighting about is a lack of emotional connection. What feeds into this lack of emotional connection is something that the Gottman Institute calls the emotional bank account.
Oh, I've heard of this concept.
Have you? Okay, what do you know about it?
It's like, oh, in a healthy relationship, like the good always needs to outweigh the bad.
Yes, exactly. They found that the way that you fill your emotional bank account is by accepting bids for connection. There's this bid for connection example that always goes around where it's like the wife points out the window and it's like, that bird is beautiful. And the husband can either respond with whatever, like not say anything, which is like rejecting the bid, or you're like, yeah, that is a beautiful bird. And like those small moments of connection are actually what fill your emotional bank account. So they call it turning towards versus turning away.
And this is on a subconscious level?
The idea is that if you're just on autopilot, it's easier to turn away, but you have to be either naturally connected or consciously choosing to turn towards your partner, which you should be doing the vast majority of the time. So they found that on average, successful couples turn towards each other and accept the bid 86% of the time, and divorced couples,
oh my God, that's so high.
Divorced couples accept only 33% of the time. They observe couples over the course of decades. So this is definitely like a prolonged pattern. Like over the past 7 years, how often have you turned towards the bid?
Okay, so it's based on people's recall ability. Like they have to remember that they turned towards the bid or didn't.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I don't know how you would actually measure that very well. It seems like very like precise numbers too. The research that they did during arguments, which is what a lot of the Gottman Institute research centers around, is how you discuss and work through conflict.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like way more scientifically driven because they actually measure your heart rate and like even your blood velocity during conflict. They have what is called the 4 horsemen of early predictors of divorce. So there are like 4 specific traits, which are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And the more that they observe these, the more likely it is that a couple will not work out.
So like even when they observe healthy couples, I guess healthy defined in this way is more likely not to get divorced, they don't exhibit those traits. And then when they see a couple who's fighting and they are exhibiting those traits, they're more likely to get divorced.
Exactly. Which is, it's tough because these are like really subtle things that are really easy to fall into. Yeah.
I know. I just feel like whenever you're fighting with someone, aren't you going to like naturally do these things?
Well, what I love about the Gottman Institute is they like admit these things and they'll show you examples of like the everyday easy ways that we act defensively, show contempt, but then like how you can combat it in a really easy way too. So let me give you an example. Like one of the things that we can do to improve our relationships is what they call softening the startup. So when you get into an argument, you either go like bat out of hell, like, why the hell didn't you like unload the dishwasher or whatever? And that's like immediately critical and sets the tone. Or you can soften the startup and be calm and like start with like maybe a loving gesture. And that will drastically improve your arguments. They find that the way that an argument starts is the way that it ends. So if it starts with
Huh.
tension, you're not going to get into a better place later. They also found, which I found very interesting, in heterosexual relationships, often the way that couples talk is like you have the events of the day conversation and then you get into more emotional stuff. And during the events of the day conversation, if the man shows either that he's bored or irritable, the woman has a harsh startup during the emotional conversation in the day. So she'll be more likely to have a softer startup in an argument if the man is engaged during the events of the day conversation.
I mean, that makes sense from like what movies to depict, I feel
Yeah,
like.
like the detached husband and then the wife just outbursts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, like, unfortunately, one of the things that I didn't find very optimistic about his research is that 86% of relationship problems are perpetual and they will not be solved. So we just have to live with them.
Wait, give me an example of that.
Like, these are problems caused by deep personality differences. So, like, if your partner wants to go out all the time and you don't, that's just a personality issue and you're not going to get over it.
Oh, okay. Basically saying people don't change. Like that will always be a
Yeah,
source
like-
of conflict for you because somebody's not suddenly going to want to go out.
Yeah, basically, like, of the arguments that even happy couples have, 86% of them are going to be things that will not change. Like, they'll always fight about them. These are like the perpetual arguments.
Oh,
I
that is
know.
depressing.
I know, it's really depressing.
I mean, I feel like that means maybe more important to like really pick someone in the beginning who's like well matched. And I don't know if you like believe in these like love quizzes that have gotten really popular lately. I really buy into them and I've like taken it seriously to like rationalize how I've picked my partner. Like the 36 questions to fall in love by the New York Times, for example. I remember doing that when I first met Avery. Actually, like our second or third date, we like went to Los Angeles. We were living in San Francisco. We drove down to Los Angeles for the weekend spontaneously because it was the honeymoon phase. We don't do
Romantic.
anything like that anymore. And we like asked each other the questions in the car ride down.
Wait, I don't know what these are. I've never heard of this.
So, okay, the New York Times came out with this article it's literally called The 36 Questions to Fall in Love. Like anybody can find it online. It's a set of 36 questions. It's broken down into like 3 sets. And the questions are basically designed to get you past like the small talk phase.
Mm.
So they're designed to be like revealing questions. I'll give you some examples since you're not as familiar. Here's a question from set 1. What would constitute a perfect day for you? A question from set 2. What do you value most in a friendship? And a question from set 3. I'm just picking these randomly. Tell your partner something that you like about them already. So, I mean, they're kind of designed to help you get past your nerves.
Yeah.
And so I totally bought into it. I was like, oh, this is like the New York Times is publishing this. It must be like scientifically backed. And then just for this episode, I was like looking into it. What is actually going on here? Is this real? And it turns out this article is based on this study from 1992 by Arthur Aaron. And the study was basically trying to figure out what creates closeness. And actually, like, love is not mentioned at all in the study. In fact, he even says, like, we should emphasize that the goal of our procedure was to develop a temporary feeling of closeness, not an actual ongoing relationship.
Yeah, I was going to say, this sounds like something that you could even like ask a friend or just anybody that you want to get to know better. It doesn't seem like specifically romantic.
Yeah, actually, like these questions have nothing to do with love. This is like just marketing. Like the New York Times just knew that like love would be sexier than like friendship or closeness.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the card game We're Not Really Strangers?
No.
It went Instagram viral a few years ago. I don't know if it's like still a thing, but it sounds exactly like this, where it's like you have a deck of cards and they have questions on them. You answer them and like you can throw down another card if someone's not getting deep enough, be like, no, dig deeper. And then at the end, you have to write the other person a little note and then they open it after you've left.
Okay.
And a lot of people do it for like dating and stuff, but then it's also just like for friendships. You can do it with your mother even. So
We should do it. You and me.
okay, we should. Oh my God, we'll record it and put it on the internet and then everyone can hear. No.
Oh my god.
We'll do it in
Yeah, I
private.
mean, I want to, we can fall in love with each other.
Cute.
Well, I mean, yeah, this is such a fun thing. I don't know. Does this even work, right? So I think like one, debunked, this is not about love. This is about just like friendships, closeness in general. And then 2, is it actually true that like if you ask these 36 questions, you will become closer to someone? And what the research found was that, so the way that they did this study was it was just like a bunch of psychology students basically who like volunteered and they paired them up. And then in this like initial 45-minute conversation, they were given these 3 sets and they had 15 minutes to answer each set of questions. And then they took a survey at the end to rank if they felt closer to this person. And so, somewhat mixed findings, frankly, nothing like that crazy or groundbreaking in terms of like huge correlations. But they found that on average, people rated that they felt as close to the person they spoke with for 45 minutes as an average relationship in their life.
Whoa.
I know. My takeaway from that is like, actually, if you feel like really lonely or like disconnected from people, which I definitely felt when I first moved to New York, I do think like, I don't know, this is super nerdy, but like going to parties with like some of these in your back pocket, if you don't like small talk, which like I hate small talk, and like pulling them out and being like, actually trying to connect with someone on a deeper level could make you feel like, for me, like that sense of connection definitely is related to fulfillment and like a good use of my time. So yeah, you can get to know someone just in like 45 minutes, an hour, compared to like people maybe you've known your whole life, which I find to be like a really uplifting finding, actually. I feel like, you know, I think you've talked about this, right? You feel like since you moved around a lot, you didn't have a lot of friends from like way back when you were a child.
Yeah.
And I relate to like a lot of my friends from high school I'm no longer friends with. And sometimes I feel sad about that because I'm like, oh, well, no one's really going to know me because like they haven't known me that long. But I do think it's like, no, if you like make the effort, share those things about yourself and also learn those things about someone else, like you can feel that closeness.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we can manufacture the conditions for closeness. Something that the Gottman Institute echoes too is that can you sort of manufacture happiness in a relationship? You're going to have these perpetual problems, but it's how you heal and move forward from them that makes all of the difference. The happy to unhappy interaction ratio for happy couples needs to be 5-1 during conflict, and it needs to be 20-1 in general, which is so much.
These are really high
but like divorced couples have really low ratios for this. So during conflict, they only show a 0.8-1 ratio positive to negative.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I need to watch some videos about like, do they have videos of people arguing? You can, maybe that's not against privacy rules.
I don't know, actually. I've heard reenactments of it.
I would love to see how other people argue. Yeah, because I am just realizing as you're discussing this, I don't ever see other people argue. I guess like other than my parents growing up. But like typically if your friends are in a relationship, they're not going to argue in front of you.
True.
So I only have my own relationship to reference when it comes to like being in a couple and arguing. And I'm like, dude, when I'm arguing, like I feel like there's not positivity.
Claws are out.
Yeah, there's not like 5 positive things to 1 negative thing. It's definitely like majority negative. But I also don't think we're at risk of becoming divorced because like we can resolve it, you know, and then it's all great. So I don't know. It's like hard for me to imagine like a happy couple arguing and still being like, you're so great and smart and I love you, but you didn't do the dishes or whatever.
Yeah, I know. I think like there's really easy ways to incorporate these principles, even if you're not somebody who's like naturally predispositioned towards it. Like I hate arguing so much, and I will try to find ways to keep some sort of affection naturally during conflict because I don't know. I think I have like some trauma from like shitty past relationships where it's like if there's like a really bad argument going on, I get almost like sick to my stomach, like, oh my God, everything is falling apart. So like I need some reassurance throughout the entire thing. And so that's actually proven to be a way to enhance your relationships, like reaching out and holding your partner's hand, taking a break and like giving each other a hug and a kiss and like reassuring, saying I love you through it. Like that's something that's a positive interaction and like will contribute to your 5-1 ratio. If you're in one of those fights where like the claws are out and it's just going terribly.
Yeah.
They showed that if you take a 20-minute break during the conflict, they had their subjects just read a magazine for 20 minutes and come back. Everything dissipated. Like they were able to get in touch with their humor. Yeah. They were able to show affection again. And humor and affection are the 2 things that you need during conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I relate to that. That's generally what I'll do because I'm definitely like the emotional, fiery person who I cannot, when I'm angry, I just like cannot be nice. So I'll just be like, okay, let's just talk about this in 30 minutes. And then by 30 minutes, I've already forgotten what I'm
Oh my God,
about.
I would not be able to be in a relationship with you. That would piss me off. I was like, I understand why this is a good thing, but like, I don't want to be done in the middle of conflict because I'm like, oh, I don't want to prolong this. I don't want this shit hanging over my head. I want to solve it right now. I'm so bad about taking a break.
So it's great that there are techniques we can learn to help us create healthy, happy relationships and lower our chances of divorce. But I feel like this begs the question, since the divorce rate, you know, for first marriages is nearly 50% in our modern society, if it's so difficult and almost against our nature to be in these long-term commitments, and we have to learn how to act differently not to ruin long-term relationships, should we even be getting married for life in the first place? Are humans meant to be monogamous? I feel like as polyamory has become more popular lately, I've heard a lot of various takes on this. I'm curious, Jennifer, what did you know about it? Like, did you think from an evolutionary perspective that humans were meant to be monogamous or not?
Weirdly, I've actually had a lot of exposure to theory around this. When I was in college, I took a class, The Evolution of Human Sexuality. And a lot of the research centered around if we are naturally monogamous or not. And like the jury is kind of out. I also read a book called Sex at Dawn, which goes into this a lot, more of like the biological evidence. Like, for instance, one of the biological evidences for us being polyamorous is that the shape of the male appendage looks like a shovel. And so it can actually shovel out other men's semen, which is insane. So like they're like, of course we were all polyamorous.
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you reference Sex at Dawn because I'm a big Vox fan and they have this series called Vox Explained where they like tackle a different topic and it's like a video essay and they like interview a lot of experts. So I like rewatched one of the videos I'd previously seen about monogamy. And one of the experts they interview is that guy who wrote
Really?
Sex at Dawn. And he talks about that. There's even like graphics. There's graphics of those male appendages and the size and the shape of them.
Hysterical.
But actually, I think this time watching it again, I was less convinced because like the majority of animal species are non-monogamous and obviously not all of them have sexual organs that look like that. So I feel like it's a bit of convoluted rationale to be like, oh, because ours look like this, that's why we're meant to be like more like bonobos. He basically draws a lot of parallels between bonobos, a specific type of monkey, and humans. Even though there's also plenty of other monkeys that don't mate in the way bonobos do and still look similar to humans.
I feel like it's been like debunked many a time. I was dating a terrible person once and they were like, during the breakup process, it was like, well, like, what if I just like wanted to be non-monogamous? Like I never felt like I could approach the subject with you about ethical non-monogamy. And like I was so infuriated. My defense was like, I've read Sex at Dawn. Like I read Esther Perel. Do you think I'm not enlightened about this subject?
Yeah, that's so funny. I mean, I was surprised because like what you said is true. I think nobody really knows, which I guess if you put into the context of human civilization, I mean, we're talking like, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And so it's maybe impossible to have like a true record, but I did think there would be more of a definitive answer. And so I guess like what I'll present right now is my take, which I believe to be the most convincing.
Of course.
And I would say it's like a mix of, yes, like evolutionary biology, but also just like how human civilization transformed and like the different social and cultural factors that influenced whether monogamy became a thing or not. And so I would say the research I found most compelling was that if we look at like the history of modern humans from a genetic perspective, I mean, 80% of the time that we've been around, we were hunter-gatherers, right? So that's like the large portion of our history. And during that period, they observed non-monogamous coupling. I think the jury's out whether it's like biology or why necessarily, maybe something cultural with those societies. But I think it's definitely true that monogamy prior to the agricultural revolution was not as common of a thing.
No, also everyone died when they were like 20. So if you lived a little longer, yeah, you probably...
Oh, sure. Yeah, maybe they would have slept around more if they had more
No, I was thinking about it the other way. Like, why would you just have one partner when they're probably going to keel over in like 2 years into your marriage?
Oh,
like, you got to play the field.
Yeah. Or maybe monogamy was just like less of a commitment, right? Because you were only going to be alive for 20
exactly.
years.
Like it wasn't the like, 70-year-long marriage that it is now.
Yeah, I mean, the most common theory is that monogamy really evolved as human civilizations started living differently. So as we moved from hunter-gatherer to agricultural societies, populations got bigger, and there's two primary theories why monogamy evolved. One is that as populations were getting bigger and we were living near each other, like sexually transmitted disease just became much more of an issue, whereas it wasn't before. And it was this punishment, quote unquote, for being polyamorous. You had more STDs. Yeah. So there's a theory that like because of that negative reinforcement, it slowly started becoming less popular. The second theory is that because all of a sudden with agriculture, you have property rights, you have ownership for the first time. Humans cared a lot more about how do you pass on those properties from generation to generation. And if you have a polyamorous situation, you don't always know like who owns what. And marriage in the legal kind of cultural sense also emerged in this time as a way to like establish power, money dynamics. And then having children and like sex was to populate your workforce for your fields, your property, and then also to have someone to pass along that property to when you died.
Okay, so more the social imperative. Because I was going to say, like the biological imperative, linking it back to venereal disease is like, okay, that stopped literally nobody.
Yeah. Yeah. So from what I could see, like at this point, again, like marriage was not about love. It was just an economic proposition.
Very Jane Austen.
Exactly. Well, it's funny because then when did this all change, right? So after the agricultural revolution, the next kind of notable shift was when the church got involved. So this is like the Middle Ages. In the like 1100s, the Catholic Church made marriage a sacrament. So then it became not only a economic proposition to be married to one person throughout your whole life and be monogamous, but also it had their religious stamp of approval. You know, it started off more about money, and then it became about
Jesus.
well, yeah, it became about morality, I guess, right? Like it started with money. And then marriage became about morality. And then modern notions of like that we should marry who we love stem from the Industrial Revolution. So the 1800s, as more people were moving to cities, again, this like shift in like how humans were actually living meant that they were far more mobile than ever before. They could actually meet people outside of their communities, outside of people that their parents introduced them to. Around this era as well, like ideas from the Enlightenment became really popular around personal happiness and personal fulfillment and the desire to go chase that for oneself. And so marrying for romance became way more of a desirable thing. And I feel like you see this like Jane Austen, Little Women, like all these novels that were written around this time really talk about this tension between marrying still as an economic prospect to solidify your wealth because women could not own property at that time, or marriage for like true love, like a love match, essentially was like the term that was like coined during this time.
Yeah, and what a can of worms that opened.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating because like here you really see the shift in like different countries, right? Because like arranged marriages in other parts of the world definitely were still a thing at this point, and they still were in America. It was because of this like industrial revolution, this moving into cities, where this like idea of like a love marriage became a lot more popular. And in other countries like China, like India, that industrialized a lot later than the United States. We don't see those ideas emerging until much later. And I feel like that reflects itself in the cultural landscape we live in today.
Yeah. Well, I think like the modern notion of marriage is really interesting compared to what it used to be, because it used to be so well defined that marriage wasn't supposed to result in you finding romantic fulfillment. This was a economic proposition that was supposed to provide you stability. Honestly, how many people had mistresses back in the day, right? It's because they're seeking emotional fulfillment outside of the marriage. And today we have this very like modern utopian idea that your partner is going to be emotionally fulfilling. You're going to have stability with them. They're going to be your everything. And that's so much pressure to put on one relationship. And I think we've seen the rise of polyamory and ethical non-monogamy in response to this. And also, I think in response to the fact that we live so much longer and you're going to be married to somebody for potentially 30, 50, 60 years, which was never, ever the case.
Yeah.
So
not like you're dead at 20 from giving birth. Or sorry, maybe 14 from giving birth to your first child.
But there was a book that recently came out. I just finished it. It's called More. Have you heard of this one?
I have heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Okay, so More is a memoir by Molly Roden Winter. And she's gotten a lot of buzz with this one because it's her account of ethical non-monogamy in her 16-year marriage. So she had 2 children with her husband. And after, I think, year 14 of their marriage, they decided to open it. And she goes through all of the trials and tribulations. It was excellent. It was a great audiobook read, so highly recommend it. But this really got me thinking about ethical non-monogamy and the challenges and also the positives with it. And I don't know, it's something that like I don't think I would ever... I mean, before I was engaged, I was like, I don't know that I would ever want to do that. And now that I am engaged, I'm like, absolutely fucking not. Like, you're not touching anybody and neither am I. But this, I love looking into it because I think it's such a fascinating, different experience with marriage that I can't relate to at all. But I don't know, I'm curious on your thoughts, like before I dive into like what is actually going on with it. Like, what are your like first instinct gut thoughts on ethical non-monogamy?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't really know that much about it, but I'm really open to it. I think that marriage is really hard. And I do agree with that statement you just made about today in our modern society, we expect this person to be everything to us. And that feels unsustainable. When I like take a step back, I'm like super rational about this stuff. Like Avery and I, every month we do a relationship check-in where we give each other feedback. And like I read somewhere that it's a best practice to like every year just have it always be a question. Like, do you want to open the marriage? So that way, like nobody has to bring it up and like secretly then the other person thinks that person must want it because they brought it up. But if it's just like always on the agenda, then you're just like always forced to talk about it. And it's like, I firmly believe it's like better to open it than like have somebody cheat on the other or like end up getting divorced because of some misunderstanding.
Yeah, no,
So-
100%. As you're saying this, I'm like remembering something that was coming up over and over again in these articles. A lot of what the ethical non-monogamy community is about is open, honest communication. And there's this idea that like the more honest and open you are, you actually bring yourself closer to your partner. So in a kind of like counterintuitive way, you're keeping the intimacy alive by doing that.
I'd be curious to hear what like couples who are actually doing ethical non-monogamy have to say. Because again, from a purely rational perspective, like the arguments make a lot of sense to me. I've just never yet had to encounter the emotional side of like, it's one thing to be like, yeah, I'm open to this. And then another to be like, we're doing this. And then coping with like the jealousy or whatever emotions come up in the moment. And so do couples who like verbally agree to that and then they actually try it end up like regretting it when they actually do it?
So great question. I tried to find stats on this and they just kind of don't exist. Like there's a stat that's like 94% of open marriages end in divorce, which is so ridiculously high. But then there's like all of these other stats that are like, oh, that's not actually true. That's a stat from the 90s that we can't substantiate. So I don't think that there's any like real good data on it.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, like there are some patterns that the research has noted where open marriages tend to like fall into the same issues. So one of them is, of course, the social stigma, which we can all anticipate. Like you kind of have to keep it under wraps. But then apparently OkCupid came out with an update where you can put ethical non-monogamy as like your relationship status and look for other people in the community.
Huh.
So I know there's like modern solutions coming out there, but yeah, like the social stigma is really tough, of course. The other one is personal insecurities. So basically any personal insecurity you have gets immediately amplified, which we can anticipate that one happening, right?
Yeah, of course. I feel like especially if your partner goes for someone who's like really different than you.
Yeah.
Or like, I feel like that would make me more insecure than if they went for someone who looked exactly like me.
Totally. Like even if somebody has an ex that's completely opposite of me, I'm like, seriously? It gives me... I think I'm just like very jealous and possessive. So like this would never work for me. And I could just like anticipate a million reasons why this wouldn't work. But the one that I found was most interesting and probably pertinent is the power dynamics. So essentially like the partner that suggests having the open marriage immediately has the upper hand because you're telling your partner like either you agree to this and make me happy or you don't and you know that I want to be with somebody else. And oftentimes the non-suggesting partner feels compelled to just say yes even though they don't want to. Oftentimes when one partner chooses not to be or wants to become closed again, it's a really big issue. And then there's all those power dynamics at play. So I think that one is the one that I can see causing most issues in conjunction with the personal insecurities.
Yeah. No, I agree. Do couples who are ethically non-monogamous, do they do it because they always knew, like even from day one? Or is it usually a result of boredom or like, I don't know, realizing years into a committed relationship or a monogamous relationship that they want?
Yeah, I think it's
something
definitely a mix. So since the 90s, it's become more accepted, honestly. Like it's a sexual preference now is polyamory. And so there are more people that are coming into relationships saying that this is what they want. But I mean, even in the case of this memoir, they decided 15 years into the marriage. Esther Perel is actually a big proponent of polyamory and open marriages. She believes that cheating happens all the time. Okay, granted, she's like Belgian. She's European. She's like free love, right? She's just like cute little French accent. Of course, she's like, yeah, like cheating happens all the time. God, that was so good. Oh my God. My fake French accent was incredible.
I'm impressed.
So anyway, she does believe that ethical non-monogamy is actually a way to preserve a marriage. Which is kind of like the same angle that you're taking it from. It's like, I would rather be in my marriage and have it open than throw it away due to a betrayal.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for me, I guess even it's funny because this is mirroring the actual biological hormones in our brain and our bodies, right? To me, like, I want to be long-term committed to this person that I've chosen. I'm going to be attached to them forever. Like, I find that to be very romantic, that like I'm going to be attached to this one person forever. But I don't think that means that I'm not going to feel lust or attraction necessarily to
Yeah.
other people. How could I say that? Like, I'm going to be alive for so many more years. And I don't know. It's like impossible for me to be like 100% I will not. And also that you will not. And then what happens if you really do for someone else? Does that mean that all of this, attachment that we've built over these years is like worthless? I think in the really rigid, you're married to one person, you're only with one person. I think that's when you do get divorced because you're too curious about, like, you essentially quote unquote fall in love with someone else and you get love mixed up with, I guess, lust and attraction, right?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this, and Molly talks about this in her memoir more too, is that it's very easy to rationalize about these things when you're thinking about it from your personal perspective. Like, oh, what if I'm attracted to somebody else and I want to open the marriage? But then when you start thinking about it from the partner's perspective, are you like, would you be okay if your partner came to you and was like, hey, I really want to fuck this other woman. Are you okay if I open up our marriage? Like, that feeling is so different and you have to be okay with both sides of it. And frankly, a lot of partners are not okay with both sides. They're okay with it for themselves, but it's really hard when it's your partner.
I wonder, I mean, I guess my question is like, if you do become comfortable, is there a trade-off, right? Like, let's say that you genuinely, your partner's coming to you and they're like, I want to sleep with someone else, and you genuinely do become okay with that idea and you guys decide to open the marriage. Is there a trade-off where now you are actually less close than you once were? Or could it make your relationship stronger?
Poly relationships tend to actually have higher levels of satisfaction. Non-monogamous couples report a 58% higher rate of relationship satisfaction compared to monogamous couples. So that's really high. But they also experience 38% higher chance of divorce. Polyamorous couples tend to have like the same 7 benefits that they see from polyamory. And like one of them is enhanced communication skills, which this makes a lot of sense. Deepened trust, broader support networks, personal growth and self-discovery, and varied and rich experiences. So I guess you could make the argument that through polyamory, you are more deeply connected to your partner. You're like getting those varied experiences from other people and you don't expect it from them. And that was kind of like the conclusion of that memoir as well. So Molly, at the end of the memoir covers like a pretty long period of time, like over like 5 or 6 years of their open relationship. And it went from just having like extramarital sex to actually having real deep in love relationships with other people. Like they had like boyfriends and girlfriends, which is crazy.
Whoa.
And at the end, she didn't want to close the relationship again. Like at the beginning, she wanted to reclose the relationship. Her partner was like, no, I want to keep it open. They had to like go to therapy over it. She wanted to keep it open at the end as well because she was finding people that she was in love with. And the way that she described it, which is like the only way that I could really wrap my head around this, because like the whole time I'm reading this book, I'm like, I don't understand how you would ever be okay with your partner like being in love with somebody else. She described it the same way that she felt about her children. So when she had her first child, she felt like an overwhelming surge of love for her son. And when she found out she was pregnant again, she was worried that she would be like kind of emotionally cheating on her first son. Like, how could I ever love another creature as much as I love you? And when her second son was born, she found that she just loved both of them so much and her love grew rather than being divided. And so her thing is like, me being in love with somebody else other than my husband doesn't take away from my love for my husband. It just grew. So I don't know if I buy it, but that's the analogy.
That was very smart that she used children, because I feel like,
you can't argue with that.
So.
Unless you want to admit that you don't love your children as much.
Right.
It's a good gotcha.
Yeah, putting it in those terms. Yeah, that's fascinating. I wonder how much of dating apps have contributed to the rise of polyamory and ethical non-monogamy, because there's just so many more accessible options out there.
Wait, you met your husband in real life though, right?
Yeah, I met him in real life, yeah. But I feel like that's like more and more rare.
So much more. I mean, there's a stat, right? Did you see any stats on like how many married couples met online?
Yeah. It's 39% in 2017 and 55% in 2021.
I mean, I met my fiance through an app, Hinge.
Yeah. And that's worked. Yeah. So we've got both experiences right here. I don't know if you feel this way since you did meet your fiance on an app. So I looked at the research from this sociologist, Dr. Marie Bergstrom, who did research at the French Institute for Demographic Studies in Paris. And she spent 13 years researching European and North American online dating platforms. conducting hundreds of interviews and also gaining access to their like anonymized data from the actual dating platforms. She found that people are more and more turning dating into like a really private activity. So a lot of times they're intentionally dating people outside of their social networks.
Interesting.
So they're saying like, if I have mutuals with this person, I am not going to swipe right because I actually don't want anyone in my network to know I'm dating this person or like be affected. And, you know, obviously we've heard a lot about the fact that online dating has promoted hookup culture and like these shorter term relationships. And like maybe some of that is, yes, just like the availability of like sex and the availability of a way more like physical attraction based way of dating, since the first thing you're looking at is like judging someone based on their photo. But also, if the nature of dating is now more private, then people are also more likely to engage in short-term relationships because there's no social pressure to have a long-term relationship.
I was going to say.
And the fallout of a breakup is really limited because like most likely your partner doesn't know your friends. You haven't actually integrated them into your social circle.
Totally. And it feels like sort of a sinister take on it too, because you're basically saying like, I have no intention of adhering to social niceties with this. Like, I don't care if I ghost you. Like, we want to have all of the protection possible against, like you said, like the social fallout, but also like, I think this speaks to the larger inability to handle things with grace when things do fall apart, or like respectfully being like, oh, this was a nice date. Like, I think we should just remain friends. Even that has kind of gone out the window. Like I've seen think pieces on like, oh, it's totally okay to ghost. Like, you shouldn't feel bad about just not responding to somebody. And obviously when that's the culture, you don't want to do that to people that are in your network.
Because the fallout is limited, you behave badly.
Have you seen, I think it's either a new dating app or like dating app add-ons that you can rate people after you've gone on a date with them? Yeah, there's like public rating systems. And there's like this rise of Facebook groups where it's like, are we dating the same person?
I have so many friends who are single and who've, you know, spent a lot of time on the dating apps. And I feel like the overwhelming feeling is just discouragement because I do think people treat each other so poorly. So even though like you can meet more people, it feels like way harder to date.
Yeah. You have to spend so much more time going on the shitty first dates, like kissing so many frogs, so to speak. Have you seen like those matchmaking shows on Netflix?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're so fun. I read Modern Romance by Aziz Ansari too. And he talks quite a bit about this and he like goes through some of the stats where I think it was like even as recently as the 50s and 60s, it was something like 60 or 70% of people met their partner within a 4-block radius of where they lived. So it was very community-based still.
Yeah, that's crazy.
You were very likely to marry one of your neighbors. And then now, of course, like the world has opened up, but it's also made it this illusion of choice. But I think it's so interesting that both in that book and in those matchmaking shows, there's this notion that like we've seen matchmaking work for centuries. And like maybe it isn't about what you think is most important to you. Maybe it is about just like committing and seeing where that commitment gets you.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be really fascinating to see how we describe this period that we're living in when it becomes history. I feel like we look back and we can point at all of these moments in time when the culture around marriage and the culture around monogamy really shifted. Like we've got the agricultural revolution when marriage became an institution. We've got when the church got involved in the Middle Ages. Then we've got the Industrial Revolution when love became much more important within the marriage institution. And then I feel like the most recent polyamory and ethical non-monogamy is like love can be amongst many. And so what does that actually end up doing then to the institution of marriage?
Yeah.
Yeah. Lots to think about.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening, guys. If you enjoy the pod, we would love for you to give us a follow and rate us on Apple Podcasts, which helps us get the word out and reach new listeners. Full transcripts and show notes are available on Patreon, where if you choose to become a patron, you'll also get access to bonus content, our monthly book club, and our eternal gratitude.
If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a topic for a future episode, email us at everythingiknowaboutpod@gmail.com or DM us across all socials at EikaPod, that's EIKA pod. Thanks for listening and see you next week.